They laughed at the crooked patch on his jacket, that morning sunlight flashing off the diner window. The mayor scoffed over his coffee, said it looked stitched from a costume rack, and the room chuckled softly. Then the light shifted. His hand brushed the patch like a flag being steadied, and every sound in that diner fell still. Quiet men leave echoes too. The gym smelled faintly of floor polish and sea air. Once it had hosted basketball games, now it carried the banner Riverton Veterans Training Center. Folding chairs lined the court, and under the flicker of fluorescent lights, townspeople fanned themselves with the day's program. Jack Turner stood near the podium, jacket pressed, but a little worn, a crooked service patch clinging to his left sleeve. He kept his hands behind his back, old habit shipdeck posture. Mayor Dalton cleared his throat, voice booming through the tinny speaker. "Nice patch, Jack. Is that from a costume store?" A ripple of laughter moved through the room. First polite, then sharper. Someone coughed to hide a grin. Jack didn't flinch. The fluorescent tubes buzzed overhead, bright as interrogation lamps. He drew a slow breath, eyes steady on the mayor. Dalton chuckled again. Thought those went out of service back in '79. Wrong year, Jack noted, but said nothing. His fingers brushed the fabric, threadbare, sun-bleached, but still whole. The laughter swelled, then broke apart into the scraping of chairs. "Anyway," Dalton added, shifting papers, "we appreciate all you retired types coming out to inspire the recruits." Jack lowered his gaze, the patch catching one last glint of light before he turned away. A few younger men followed his movement, with half pity, half smirk. The shipyard still smelled of salt and engine oil when the morning light came in soft and gray. Jack Turner kept the same routine every day, unlocking the gate before the sunrise, letting the gulls announce the shift change. His apprentice, Ethan Bell, was already there, sleeves rolled, wiping condensation from the patrol boat's deck. The old engine waited on the stand, bolts half loosened like a heart mid-surgery. Jack sipped from a dented thermos, the steam curling upward and catching the thin sun that broke through the window. "Morning, Chief," Ethan said, using the nickname everyone in town used when they forgot he'd never been one. "Morning," Jack replied. "Fuel line's still clogged, yeah. Thought I'd fire up the engine once we clear the gunk." The words hung between them. Jack almost smiled. In his head, fire up meant something else entirely. Discipline, the start of duty, a promise, reignited. He watched the younger man work calm and deliberate. Ethan had a knack for listening, even when he didn't ask much. While reaching for a wrench, Ethan brushed against a leather-bound scrapbook, lying half-hidden beneath a tarp. The cover was cracked, the edges worn soft by years of oil and dust. He flipped it open before realizing what it was. "Is this yours?" he asked. Jack turned, caught off guard, eyes narrowing slightly. "Where'd you get that?" "It was just sitting there." Didn't mean to snoop. Inside the album, tucked between faded letters, was a photograph, two sailors side by side on a pier, both smiling, both wearing the same patch on their sleeves. One of them was unmistakably younger Jack Turner. Ethan tapped the photo. "This the same one you wear?" Jack's gaze drifted to the patch on his jacket. The stitching caught the light just the same as it had in the picture. "Some promises," he said quietly, "get sewn deeper than they look." Ethan nodded, unsure what to say next. The air thickened with the smell of diesel and salt. The younger man wanted to ask who the other sailor was, but something in Jack's posture, straight, still distant, told him not to. By noon, the workshop radio hissed through local chatter. Between songs, a woman's voice reported, "Town rumors claim retired mechanic Jack Turner may have purchased his Navy patch online. Source unverified." Ethan froze, glancing toward Jack, who was tightening a bolt with deliberate slowness. "People say things when they don't have work to do," Jack murmured. Outside, the tide rolled in, tapping against the dock. Later that afternoon, June Torres stood in the post office line balancing a box of pie tins. Two clerks whispered nearby. "You hear online heroes, real zeros," one said, shaking her head. June's voice cut clean through the hum of conversation. "That man's fixed half the engines in this town. His hands speak louder than any rumor." The clerks went quiet. Letters slid across the counter without eye contact. Back at the shipyard, Ethan pretended to study the spark plugs, but his thoughts wouldn't settle. He wanted to believe Jack's quiet explanation, and he did. But now the story felt heavier, as if the patch had begun to carry everyone's opinion stitched into its edges. He handed Jack a wrench. "You ever think of telling them what it means?" Jack shook his head. "Wouldn't make a difference. Truth's like oil. It takes time to rise." The thermos hissed as he poured more coffee. Steam lifted between them again, drawing a wavering line through the sunlight before fading away. Ethan watched it disappear, realizing that maybe silence was its own kind of proof. Outside, the ocean wind cut through the alley between the gym and the diner. Jack paused beside a trash can overflowing with paper cups. He could still hear echoes of laughter inside, muffled by the heavy door. June Torres pushed through the diner's side entrance apron, dusted with flour. "Hey, Jack," she called softly. "Coffee?" He nodded once. She poured into a paper cup, added 2 sugars without asking. Steam drifted up between them, catching the late morning sun. "Guess some medals don't shine till they're earned twice," she said, half smiling, sliding the cup into his hand. Jack looked at her, the corner of his mouth barely lifting. The wind flapped the diner's flag until it snapped straight, then fell quiet again. He took a sip. The coffee was too hot bitter in a comforting way. Inside, the meeting droned on without him. He could picture Dalton gesturing toward the chart, explaining the new budget for public morale programs. Jack leaned against the brick wall, eyes tracing the cracks shaped like river lines. He'd been through worse engines catching fire mid-sea letters arriving too late. Still, this small humiliation stung deeper than he expected. June wiped her hands on her apron, studied him for a second. "You still coming by the diner tonight?" "Maybe," he murmured. "Got a few things to fix first." "Things," she tilted her head. He looked down at the patch. "One of 'em's crooked." June laughed, not cruelly but gently, the way you'd laugh to lift a friend's shoulders. "Bring it by. I got a needle somewhere." He nodded, set the cup on the railing, and straightened the patch with slow, careful fingers. The stitching tugged, but held. For a moment, everything stilled the gulls. The flag, even the hum of the vending machine inside. Then he stepped away from the building, walking toward the narrow street that led to the shipyard. Behind him, the sound of the crowd had faded to a distant, harmless murmur. He didn't answer anyone that morning, just straightened the patch before walking out. The diner glowed like a small ship in the dark, its neon sign humming over the parking lot. Inside, the air was thick with coffee steam and argument. Newspapers lay unfolded across the counter, the bold headline from Dalton's column spreading through town, faster than the evening tide decorated imposters and the illusion of honor. Every booth carried a version of the same conversation. If the patch was real, he'd have proof, a man at the counter said, tapping the paper with a greasy thumb. "You can buy anything online now." Another voice rose from the back, sharp with pride and fatigue. "That man fixed engines when no one else would. You think he'd need to fake a memory?" The clatter of spoons echoed against porcelain cups. June Torres moved between tables, her apron fluttering as she poured refills without speaking. In the corner, 2 veterans argued quietly, their voices trembling more from age than anger. The laughter that followed each accusation wasn't cruel anymore. It was nervous, uncertain, the kind that tries to drown guilt. Then the diner's door opened, and the bell above it gave a single clear note. Chief Harrison stepped in, coat collar turned up against the wind. He didn't speak, just nodded to June and took a seat at the counter. His presence drew a slow hush over the room. He'd been in uniform longer than most men had been alive, and though his back was curved now, his silence still commanded a kind of order. Someone at the next booth muttered, "That patch means nothing." The words hung there louder than the jukebox. Harrison's hand froze halfway to his mouth, coffee cup trembling slightly. For a moment, even the neon buzz seemed to fade. He placed the cup down gently, eyes fixed on no one in particular. "Funny," he said, voice low but steady. It once meant survival. The room went still. A spoon clinked somewhere near the pie case. Outside, the radio from a passing truck drifted through the open window, carrying a few bars of America the Beautiful. June let out a small breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Someone whispered, "Guess that's enough for tonight," and chairs scraped as people gathered their coats. Harrison stayed seated, watching the coffee ripple. When the last customer left, he looked at June. "You see him today?" She nodded. "At the yard this morning." He didn't say much. Harrison's eyes softened. He never does. The radio crackled again, a static break between notes, like the space between words no one dared to speak. Then he stood, dropped a few coins on the counter, and straightened his hat. "Tomorrow," he said, "I'll make sure they remember what that patch stands for." June watched him walk into the night, the door closing behind him, with a slow, respectful sigh from the hinges. The neon buzz returned steady and soft, like the diner itself was exhaling. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying the faint scent of the harbor, back toward the town that was finally beginning to fall silent. The town hall smelled of dust and varnish, its windows catching the pale light that slanted through like quiet judgment. Rows of folding chairs faced the front, where a long table waited beneath the faded town seal. The meeting had drawn half of Riverton veterans in pressed shirts, teenagers in hoodies and townsfolk clutching the paper that had started all this. Mayor Dalton sat in the center, tapping a pencil against his clipboard. Chief Harrison stood near the aisle, cap in hand, his expression unreadable. When he finally spoke, the room stilled. "Mr. Mayor," he said, voice carrying with the slow confidence of command, "I'm requesting the service record of Jack Turner be reviewed in public session." Dalton blinked. "That's not procedure, Chief. Maybe it's time we made an exception." The crowd murmured. Jack rose from the back row, the envelope gripped carefully in his hand. He walked forward, boots clicking softly on the old floor. Each step felt heavier than the last, like the years had pooled inside his shoes. He reached the table, placed the envelope and his patch on the wood. "If it's truth you want," he said quietly, "it's all in there." Dalton smirked. "And what exactly are we supposed to see? That you wore someone else's insignia? That's impersonation under code." The chief's jaw tightened, but he didn't move. Jack drew a slow breath, eyes never leaving the mayor's. "That patch belonged to Petty Officer Cole," he said. "He was my engineer on the rescue mission off the Atlantic, 1989. Storm capsized the boat. He tied me to a rail so I wouldn't wash away. We got one man back. He didn't make it." A whisper rolled through the crowd, the kind that sounds like wind before rain. Jack lifted the patch gently, thumb tracing the edge where the thread had frayed. "They sent it home in his things. His mother asked me to carry it until someone remembered his name." Dalton leaned forward. "You realize you violated uniform protocol." Jack met his stare. He was slammed by procedure, but he held his ground like a flag. The words hit the air like a slow drum beat, steady and true. Silence followed deep enough that the hum of the overhead lights seemed to fade. Chief Harrison's gaze drifted toward the ceiling, then back down to the patch. He moved to the front, set his cap on the table beside it. With the unhurried grace of someone who had saluted 1,000 times before, he stood straight, shoulders back, and raised his hand. The sound of fabric brushing his sleeve echoed louder than any speech. The entire hall followed one by one, hands lifted, heads bowed. Even Dalton froze, caught between shame and realization. The light from the high windows struck the patch directly, and for a moment it gleamed brighter than any metal could. No one spoke. Outside, gulls passed overhead, their cries distant and sharp against the hush. When the chief lowered his hand, the quiet held a heartbeat longer, then broke with the soft shuffle of feet and the rustle of papers. Jack gathered the envelope, left the patch resting on the table. The chief's voice carried after him, low but firm. "You honored him the right way, Turner." Jack stopped, nodded once, and walked into the sunlight waiting beyond the doors. The air outside felt wider, like the town itself had exhaled. Inside, the patch stayed where it was, glowing faintly in the dust-filled light. The morning light poured through the diner's front window, soft and golden dust floating in thin lines across the counter. The radio above the register hummed through the news segment, the announcer's voice calm and deliberate. At yesterday's town hearing, Chief Harrison publicly confirmed the service record of retired mechanic Jack Turner, resolving weeks of controversy surrounding a patch he has worn since his Navy days. The silverware paused mid-air. No one said a word. Every stool along the counter was taken, and even the regulars who usually filled the place with loud talk sat quiet, heads bent slightly toward the speaker. Mr. Turner's patch officials learned belonged to his late crewmate, Petty Officer Cole, the voice continued. "The patch has become a symbol of enduring service and remembrance among the Riverton community." A soft crackle followed, then a faint guitar chord. "June." Torres turned down the volume. The silence that remained wasn't awkward. It was the kind of stillness that feels like gratitude. The bell over the door jingled as Ethan stepped in, his hands smelling of salt and oil. "Morning, June." "Morning, kid," she said, sliding a cup his way. "You just missed the broadcast." "Heard it walking here," Ethan replied. "Guess the whole town did." He took a sip, grimaced. "You sure this isn't engine fuel?" June smiled for the first time all morning. "Coffee's finally as strong as his patch." A ripple of laughter spread through the diner, small, sincere, just enough to lift the air. Outside, the flag across the street caught a slow breeze, its shadow swaying over the sidewalk. June reached beneath the counter and lifted a framed photo, the patch lying on the town hall table, sunlight striking it like an old medal rediscovered. She hung it near the door above the row of dollar bills signed by sailors who'd passed through over the years. Beneath the picture, she taped a hand-lettered caption, "Earned twice." The words looked uneven, but true. Ethan finished his coffee, then unfolded a small piece of fabric from his jacket pocket. It was a replica of the patch thread, still loose around the edges. "Figured we could add it to the banner before the dedication." June's eyes softened. "You've been working on that?" Jack showed me the stitch pattern, he said. "Said every thread's supposed to pull toward the heart." She nodded. "Seems right." They stepped outside together. The street was unusually calm for mid-morning. A few store owners stood in their doorways, listening to the same radio station echo from inside. Across the square, two older veterans leaned on the fence near the memorial garden, hats held to their chests. Ethan crossed the street to where the town banner hung half-finished across a wooden frame. With June holding one corner, he sewed the new patch into place, careful with each pass of the needle. The sound was barely audible, thread scraping fabric, the wind folding in between. When they stepped back, the patch caught the sun again, glowing faintly. People had begun to gather quietly around them. No speeches, no ceremony. Just faces familiar and calm. The same ones who'd once laughed now stood in easy silence. June looked at them, then at the flag above flapping once before settling. "Feels like the town's holding its breath," she whispered. "Maybe it's just remembering how to listen," Ethan said. A car radio somewhere down the block replayed the hearing excerpt, Harrison's voice saying, "You honored him the right way, Turner." The sound faded into static, then into soft guitar chords once more. June returned to the diner door, glanced back at the banner, and smiled. The wind carried the scent of coffee and salt toward the harbor, the flag waving in slow rhythm to the music that played on, unbroken and warm. Motive stage echo, community echo, humor. Coffee's finally as strong as his patch. Feed warmth, silent beat. Description, 150 words. Dialogue, 35 to 40%. The air in Veterans Park carried the clean scent of autumn maple leaves, brass polish, and the faint sweetness of cider from a stand near the gate. The crowd stood in loose circles, sunlight glinting off flagpoles and eyeglasses. A week had passed since the hearing, and Riverton felt quieter, steadier, as though the whole town had exhaled. Near the front of the stage, Jack Turner sat beside June and Ethan. His jacket was pressed the sleeve bare where the patch used to be. In its place, a small square of darker fabric marked where it had rested for decades. The mayor read a few lines from a paper voice, formal but subdued. "Today we dedicate this plaque to the memory of Petty Officer Cole and to the spirit of service that continues through men like Mr. Turner." The microphone crackled, a small reminder that even official words have limits. When he finished, he stepped aside for Chief Harrison. The old man moved slower than before, but still stood tall, his uniform collar bright against the sun. He turned toward Jack, and the crowd instinctively hushed. For a long breath, there was no movement, just the rustle of the trees and the flutter of the flags behind him. Then the chief raised his hand in a single deliberate salute. The gesture held there steady as a held note. Cameras clicked once, then stopped. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was reverent full. Jack met his eyes and nodded. The moment stretched like a heartbeat shared between two generations of the same promise. Beside the podium, the new memorial case caught the light. Inside it, the patch rested on dark velvet thread edges glimmering gold. Beneath it, a small plaque read, "For service carried quietly." Ethan stepped forward, holding a second plaque, made of simple wood. "We thought you should have this one," he said, voice trembling slightly. "You kept your word longer than anyone knew." Jack reached for it but didn't speak. His fingers brushed the engraved letters, tracing them like a familiar path. The young man hesitated, then looked out at the crowd. They laughed once. Ethan said, "Steady now, but they'll stay silent now," the right kind of silence. People nodded. Some clapped softly. Others simply stood with their hands folded, letting the quiet speak for them. Jack looked toward the flag at the edge of the park, its stripes catching the sunlight in slow waves. "Quiet thanks carry further than any cheer," he said. The wind lifted the words, carrying them over the crowd, through the branches, and toward the harbor beyond. The chief lowered his hand. Someone began a low guitar strum from the back of the crowd, a tune too soft to name but easy to feel. June wiped her eyes with a napkin she'd pulled from her pocket. The applause that rose wasn't loud. It was warm, restrained, and real. The sun caught the edge of the plaque one last time, turning the engraved letters to gold. Then the park fell quiet again, save for the rustle of flags and the faint rhythm of the music. If the town had learned anything, it was how to listen. The flag in Veterans Park moved with the steady hush of the afternoon light glinting off the memorial glass where the patch now rested. Still, the crowd lingered after the ceremony, drawn by something quieter than applause, the kind of silence that carries gratitude instead of noise. A child tugged his father's sleeve, pointing at the plaque that read, "For service carried quietly," and the man only nodded as if words might cheapen it. Then Jack stepped closer, his reflection joining that of his fallen crewmate's patch, and he smiled faintly. "Quiet thanks carry further than any cheer," he said, voice steady as the wind.